I'm overwhelmed just with the, just a death toll.
Genetic justice for the culture.
Please join us for genetic justice for the culture.
Black health matters, and these disparities have to end.
Genetic justice for the culture.
Early prevention plus early treatment saves lives.
For the culture.
Stay tuned and learn how you can become part of the clinical trials experience.
Genetic justice for the culture.
We are so excited to share with you some of these subject matter experts. Genetic justice for the culture.
Genetic justice for the culture.
Genetic.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening to talk about genetic justice and announcing a partnership between Henrietta Lacks and HeLa Cells. Before we get started, I want to provide a bit of a background concerning Henrietta Lacks. I know everybody's not familiar with her story, but the story behind Henrietta Lacks is that on yesterday, October 4th, marked the 70th anniversary of her death, October 4th, 1951. However, on February 1st, 1951, that's when she went into the hospital at Johns Hopkins that some of you may be familiar with. She went through a typical biopsy procedure, and during that time, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. During that appointment with Dr. Gay, at that time was when her cells were lifted with that biopsy and shared with the life science industry. And since then, the industry, as far as life sciences, biotech, biopharma, has made not millions, but billions of dollars off her cells. And so to give you some specifics behind that, her cells cannot be input into patients, but they are used to discover blockbuster drugs. So such as the COVID-19 vaccine that you guys may have in your arm at this point, HPV, in vitro infertility, as well as cancer. Her cells has been the essential foundation, the essential backbone of discoveries for vaccines and treatments that we have on the market today. Unfortunately, Mrs. Lacks and her family, her descendants that are still living today in Baltimore, Maryland, have not received any compensation for Mrs. Lacks' contribution to the life science industry. And so today, with your help, with your engagement with us, we're going to talk about how we can be better in making sure that people are fairly compensated for their contributions to the life science industry. We'll also be talking with my colleague here, Mr. Yusuf Enriquez, CEO of Indigenous AI, They have a unique business model and strategy for rectifying these issues with Henrietta Lacks, as well as what went on with the Tuskegee Airmen. And you'll be able to, once they present that model to you, you guys have an opportunity to actively volunteer as research participants and join in on that process for us to reclaim what is ours as far as genomic data and actively participate in medical research so that the drugs and the medicines that are produced are more acclimated to us as a people as far as being African American, people within the African diaspora or of Latin descent. If you need an example of that, you guys are very familiar with what's plaguing us as a community as far as diabetes, cancer, all those different types of things is what we're working on to make sure that, one, we're included in the clinical trial so we can take a look at how we're made up, what makes us walk and talk and make us who we are as a people, and then look at that and determine what are the gaps that we need to fill in with medications and treatments to help us be better people and be healthy. So next you'll hear a little bit from our speakers on our panel, some of which are live with us as well. I believe we have David Whalen from Bioscience LA. We have Dr. Bradford Wilson, that's also with us as a CSO, Chief Scientific Officer with Indigenous. So just a few moments here, you'll hear from our speakers, and we'll continue. And please ask your questions live so that we can engage with you lively and keep forward.
I'm Gina Page, president and co-founder of AfricanAncestry.com. We are the pioneers of genetic ancestry tracing for Black people around the world. And this topic is important to us because as African Americans, as people of African descent, we need to be involved. We need to be engaged. Once we understand who we are, then we can take control of how we live, and participating in clinical trials in having drugs that work for us are very important to the survival of our community. And so I'm happy to be here to participate in this conversation.
Hey everyone, my name is Sharissa Jackson. I am the founder and CEO of Project Give Hope. I am a retired woman veteran. I'm a proud woman veteran. I'm an advocate for women's health. I do a lot of projects around cervical cancer, and Project Give Hope is all about that. I wear this bracelet every day for the colors of Uganda because I was there 2 years in a row in 2018 and 2019. And I was there to save women, to give women hope who are suffering from cervical cancer. It was a project, it still is a project that's near and dear to my heart. We weren't able to go to Uganda last year, nor Nigeria this year because of COVID. But again, I think this project of DNA sequencing and learning our genetic history is important because it will give us that gateway to who we are so that medical attention, medical conditions could be seen, heard, talked about prior to giving medications that may not be working. And so I just think that this project is so needed. I think is past due, and I'm so proud to be part of this project.
Hello, I'm Dave Whalen, the CEO of Bioscience LA. We're an independent nonprofit organization, a couple years old in Los Angeles, that's really designed to raise the profile, growth, opportunity for the life sciences ecosystem. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physician, but I've worked in the life sciences and kind of health tech industry for a number of years, including wearables, including genomics. And so the idea of healthcare data and how do we maximize the value of healthcare data is really important to me.
So I'm David Kepsel, and I've been a philosophy professor for the past 20 years. And I've been focusing a lot on bioethics and ethics and technologies for that time period. I've written some books on the subject, including a book called Who Owns You, which is about gene patenting. And I founded in 2017 with my partner, who's also my spouse, the company EncryptGen. And our goal was to address some of the issues relating to the fair distribution of profits and revenue from the use of genomic data to people who are contributing that data, and to ensure that there's more data available for research, for science, and that those data sets are more diverse. So I'm particularly interested in genetic justice because when I was teaching, I often reference the Henrietta Lacks case, and that was a big motivator for us when we designed the nature of our platform.
Okay. All right, guys. So we're continuing on with the show here. We did receive one question. I believe somebody asked about the announcement or the filing of the lawsuit with the Henrietta Lacks family against Thermo Fisher. I don't know all the details of that case, so I will say allegedly Thermo Fisher has done some wrongdoing against the Henrietta Lacks family. But I will comment on, if you guys were able to read my op-ed, which gave you some history of the Henrietta Lacks case, and let you know what's currently going on in the market. For those of you who are watching from the very beginning, I mentioned that her cells are being sold in the commercial market, so I'll provide a tidbit on that right now in reference to that question concerning what allegedly Thermo Fisher may be guilty of. Currently in the life science market, the HeLa cells are being cultured, manufactured, licensed, and patented in the commercial market by clinical research organizations known as CROs, or contract development manufacturing organizations, people that actually manufacture these cells and sell them. They're building cell banks. And so the whole point is, ironically, all the things that the U.S. federal government has said that Henrietta Lacks is not able to do, or her family is not able to do, which is actually to patent those cells and sell them in the commercial market. For some reason, these CROs and CDMOs, and now allegedly Thermo Fisher, have been successful at patenting those cells and selling them in the commercial market and making a profit. For example, right now, a 2 milliliter vial of HeLa cells are being sold at a price of at a minimum of $400 something odd dollars. But as of recent, since it's COVID-19 and they've been used in the discovery of these vaccines for COVID-19, they are upwards at a price at around $2,500 per a 2 milliliter vial. The other thing that people may not be aware of is that currently the U.S. market is pretty much almost stocked out of these particular cells. So it'll be interesting, to see where it goes and who will actually come to the surface of actually manufacturing these cells for sale in the commercial market. But we'll continue the show. Please keep your questions coming. Or if you have commentary that you just want to put out a comment and want us to address and expound upon, feel free to put in the chat, and we'll be right back with you. Or something.
Thank you for attending this session, which is a very important topic that has been central to my work over the past decades: the importance of health equity and inclusion in medical research. I want to thank our three sponsors, HeLa Plex, Indigenous, EncryptGen, as well as African Ancestry, for their support in bringing this event to you today. As African Americans, we need to be part of clinical trials. These trials help improve the health of all of us and serve to provide greater understanding of health disparities. Past medical experimentation, which was most often brutal and unethical, was practiced on us. This has served to fortify the legacy of mistrust in the medical system and has culminated in justifiable barriers for us to participate in clinical trials. To address this, we must now be intentional and focused in amping up awareness about clinical trials in our community. Community education by trusted voices, ongoing communication with the community, genuine commitment to honesty and transparency by the entire research community, and adequate compensation are first steps in climbing the ladder to health equity. And we must collect the data that can explain to us the extent of these inequities. Imagine, if you will, using a healthcare system that has no concept of you as a human being, of your culturally appropriate, unique health needs. Nurses might not ask important questions. Doctors overlook the solution you require. You feel unwelcomed. Health equity then is also about an honest desire not to allow biases to keep our care providers from treating every individual with respect and dignity as we together work to safeguard their health. We have a powerful panel who will give you the information that's necessary to participate in clinical trials as we too become part of the unfolding narrative of what's important to our health and the health of the next generation.
All right, we got another question. I'm going to let Yusuf take this one. I'm going to ask the question so you guys can see it. Given the historic exploitation that has been committed against our community, where can African Americans go to participate in health data collecting endeavors that will actually serve us? Go ahead, Yusuf.
Hello, good afternoon. Yusuf Enriquez here, founder and CEO of Indigenous Health. This is a big concern of us in the community. I think what you see here is the new frontier of how we could move forward in working together with communities to build our own biorepository and biobanks, to start working together with pharmaceutical companies and other manufacturing companies in order to start driving more precision health equity in these trials. As you currently know, approximately 95% of all drug trials currently being conducted in the world is 95% European white males. And so, this is one of the reasons why we are having this session, is to bring some attention to that, those numbers, and how we can move forward in working together with our community to build our own repository that will then put more diversity in clinical trials of women and also minorities, BIPOC communities. The question is really pointed to why we're having this session, and why Lucas Pi Bio, HeLa Plex, and Indigenous are forming that collaborative team in order to start building our own repository. We have now launched our initiative, By Us for All, which is, you could go to www.byusforall.com to sign up and pledge your commitment in providing your clinical health data, and also, the opportunity to provide your blood sample as well. So, we're now creating a movement and being intentional, as Dr. Downer mentioned on that, on her presentation, because we really want to start focusing on how we can increase diversity and bring better efficacious drugs to the market that would include more diversity in African Americans and minorities, and then driving better efficacious medication throughout the drug manufacturing industry.
Great. Any other comments from anybody else on the team? Just on that question?
Any other questions anybody want to ask quickly before we go on to the next segment of the show?
Oh, we just got a new one. What is the count of African Americans among COVID-19 deaths?
That's, again, I think, what we saw is in that the video, the count of deaths in total is very high. Almost 700,000 people have died. And so you saw the clip where we were able to show the small white flags that were on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. that represented the deaths. I don't know the accurate number, of course, off the top of my head, but what I can say is majority of those individuals that passed away are, Black and brown folks that had a lot of underlying health disparities that triggered that. And so, our work that has been looking across this, we need to do better as a community in order to make sure that our communities are addressing some of these health disparities that we just touched on, that are, underlying disease areas that were definitely exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, we could get back to you with those numbers from the CDC. However, there is a small discrepancy in how those deaths were reported, where the race wasn't really collected in some of those reports. And so if you look at the dashboard that the Johns Hopkins public health group has put up, also with CDC requirements, those are some of the policy areas that we'll have to work on and starting to make sure that race is also included when some of this data is being provided for both deaths and also adverse drug reaction and experiences over the time. Given an example with the COVID vaccine right now, being that it's been rapidly deployed across the entire globe, there's still a lot of unanswered questions around the adverse events that will be underlying for the vaccine being given to our minority community. So I implore upon you guys in order, again, to make sure that that's something that we'll be watching and making sure that we're getting the information and data in order to provide to you guys through our content on our channel and our website.
All right. Again, thank you guys for watching. We're getting ready to roll on to the next segment.
We got a comment.
Oh,
Dr.
one more
Wilson
comment.
wants to add a comment.
Go ahead, Dr. Wilson.
Yes, good evening. I can add to that some stats that we do actually have linked to some access to indicates that it's about 1 in approximately 555 African Americans have died from COVID. That's the an approximate estimation in terms of the rate of death in the African American community.
The first question is, how important is inclusion in the medical research industry?
It's very important that we be included in medical research. Listen, we want inclusion in everything else. We want inclusion in the workplace. We want inclusion in the marketplace. So why wouldn't we want inclusion in medical research, which directly impacts the quality of our lives in a way that no other part of our daily existence does, right? We, where we go to work, what we do every day, that impacts the quality of our lives. And the products that we buy, that impacts the quality of our lives. But what you're putting in your body, the things that are supposed to help you live better, why wouldn't you want inclusion in that? And so companies like Indigenous and HeLa Cells, they're helping to create drugs that will make your life inherently better. And you should want to be a part of that.
We're not all the same. And so if you're treating us all the same and expecting all of us to have the same outcome, then I think that's asinine. Not only from a medical standpoint, but as far as just in the community as a whole, we all are different. Our DNA is different. So it's important that you have inclusion so you can really find those preventative measures, those medications that's going to work to a population of people that you're serving. And at the end of the day, we as clinicians, we as people in the medical field, we are people of service. And I think we're doing our patients a disservice by not including and doing research to make it inclusive, so we're giving people the best outcomes.
Is really about how do we get more data into the system so we can actually make better decisions about this increasingly diverse population to understand the world. The challenge and what's happened over the years, whether it's Henrietta Lacks' story specifically, the eugenics movement, other experiments done in, during World War II, things like that are, are patients or individuals consenting to even have their information being used? do they get some value from it, whether it's medical value for them? Because if someone's used as a test subject and that research could reveal something that could help them or help their families, but it's not available to them because of confidentiality. And at the same time, there's a whole nother population that is reaping benefits from those understandings.
They get that new Wakanda team that can deliver on making sure that the future of medicine for us as a community gets shifted in the right direction, that we're at the front end instead of the back end of just waiting for medications to show up at our doorstep with that same lack of diversity.
In our families, there are people who suffer from diabetes and hypertension and all sorts of diseases that require that we take a lot of medication. And it struck me when she said that we're going to participate in medical research one way or the other. We're either going to participate in it on the front end through clinical trials to ensure that we get the types of medications that work specifically for us, or we're participating in it on the back end when we're taking all these drugs and then our reactions to them are charted and researched. And so it just depends on where you want to be in the equation for your family. Do you want to help so that perhaps they don't have to go through that? Or do you want to wait until you have to go through it and then suffer?
More questions here from the audience. The first question concerning DNA being taken for certain criminal cases. What is done about that genetic justice in that area? So Yusuf, the CEO of Indigenous, is going to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as the science starts to evolve, right, these are areas that are going to be explored from different industry, right, whether it's the criminal justice system or, increasing the diversity of genetic data of our minority and BIPOC community. What I can say is I'm not a legal expert, but, there are mechanisms that's set up in order to prevent that level of information being provided to law enforcement. I think you've seen cases over the years that have highlighted some of the decisions and verdict around providing information to the criminal justice system around with DNA. I think what we could say here is, given the technology that we're using and being able to de-identify the information that we're going to be collecting, we do understand that there is some small chance that criminal justice system or law enforcement would ask to provide some of that information. But I think over the years we've seen other proven case of those requests being turned down, whether it's through social media requests, through Facebook and other media channels, and also requests from other individuals around DNA and providing identity through de-identifying some of the information that would be provided through our sample collection. I have Dr. Bradford Wilson on the line, and he may be able to share a little bit more from a geneticist standpoint, but there are some mechanisms that have already been created in order to prevent a lot of this from happening. And so I'll let him see if he wanted to chime in on that question as well.
Sure, Yusuf. So in terms of your genetic information, there are a couple of different contexts and couple of different arenas in that you're talking about it being used or for the potential of it being misused. In one case, you're talking about in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of forensics area, in that sense, and then the other is really in terms of insurance for insurance purposes for medical insurance or health or life insurance. In terms of your genetic information being used against you. Now, on that front, in terms of insurance, there is a piece of legislation, that's the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, that does have some provisions that provide some levels of protections for your genetic information being used to deny you insurance or to deny you coverage in some way, shape, or form. Now, with regards to the use of it in the criminal justice sense, that the use of it there is being used slightly different with regards to your guilt or innocence of a crime, and I would argue there that the use of genetic information probably do more to exonerate more individuals in that case, in that front, with regards to actually testing genetic information from crime scenes and actually proving whether or not an individual is actually present, or if their genetic material is present on the scene of a crime. And again, I'm not a forensic pathologist or a specialist. I don't specialize in forensics, but the basic science that's used is the same. But in terms of the context of protecting you and your information there, it's a little bit different with regards to criminal justice versus discrimination from insurance providers.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wilson. We have time for one more question before we go to the forusbyall.com. What steps are being taken so that companies are held accountable for ethical violations when it comes to genetic data? I'm going to defer to Dr. Wilson to that question as well. Dr. Wilson, can you help us out with that one?
Sure. Well, this is relatively a new area. The science is relatively new. The genome was only sequenced about 20 years ago, 30 years ago now. So with regards to laws and protection of the law, the legal system kind of has to catch up to the science in that regard, in terms of that, these different applications and different potential, again, misuses of this information as they kind of arise and kind of surface. So with regards to legislation, it's all about the teeth of the legislation, and there's not a lot of it out there, right? It's just in terms of the applications of the legal system. There are kind of a couple of areas that have come up with regards to against misuse of information by insurance companies. Specifically, that's one specific case where some legislation has been enacted, but otherwise there's not a whole lot of it out there in terms of providing this type of assurances and protections of the misuse of this information. It's similar to I would say it's somewhere along the lines of what we're talking about in terms of identity theft as well, right? In terms of but this information is a little bit harder to come by, but it's still pertaining to your being able to identify you as a person, and the leveraging the genetic information for that purpose. So with regards to the laws specifically, to answer the question again, to try to answer the question to the best of my ability anyway, is there's not a lot of law out there in terms of protecting you from misuse of your information out there, by whether it be by corporate entities or other individuals. We have another question coming in, I think.
Steps are in place to prevent further exploitation from even these great companies on this webinar. How would it be different than giving it to Big Pharma? I'll set it up, and then Yusuf can better explain that, and or Dr. Wilson can better explain it from the indigenous point of view. But the purpose of our collaboration between HeLa and my other company, Lucas Pop Bio, is really setting up a program where we will be able to actually evaluate those blood samples that you guys submit. They will map out the whole genome. So they will sequence the whole genome of each of you as individuals. They will analyze it, and then from there we'll be able to see some areas where we can improve or create medicines to better treat us for different ailments or different things we have going on in our community, such as diabetes, colon cancer, things of that nature. And so specifically to answer your question, we're going to do the same as some of our industry peers as AfricanAncestry.com. When you submit a saliva sample to that company, they do the testing. They'll be able to tell you from what tribe and what heritage you come from in the country of Africa, but that sample is immediately destroyed. And so we would do the same thing at Indigenous, and again, I'll let Yusuf and Dr. Wilson further explain it from that standpoint, but the whole point is that your blood sample will not be shared, cannot be reused. All they need is that blood sample to run it through the machine to map out your whole genome sequencing, and then from there it'll be analyzed to do what we do best to get to the next step of creating and developing biotherapeutics to better treat BIPOC in our respective communities. Go ahead, Yusuf.
I think the ECHO, we've stand on some primary principles. Again, I think as you see, you hear from the individuals that's answering the questions. We look like you, so therefore we'll be protecting you the same way we'll be protecting ourselves. I think what we are encouraging is that get involved in the research, but it's who you provide that genetic sample to that's going to change the trajectory of what we could do as a community. Our goal is to make sure that the highest level of privacy and security will be provided when you provide those samples. And again, following the pioneers within this space, who Dr. Rick Kittles and Dr. Gina Page have been doing this over 18 years, and we strongly support their philosophy, and we'll be building on that. What we need to do now as a community, we still need more engagement, especially around us being involved in the trial. However, the fundamental core of what we're doing is to de-identify this data, scrub it of any personal health information that links to the patient. There's only a couple of key metrics that you need to do that with collecting the sample, with clinical information. And then, we'll have a blockchain encrypted biobank and repository that will be housing that genetic data under the strictest privacy and security that we'll be able to provide based on technology. So we're creating probably one of the first genomic biorepository with a blockchain capability of understanding where that sample would be shared. And so the ledger would create that privacy and security that we had planned to establish with every individual that provide their samples to us. I'll let Brad chime in if he wanted to give some additional feed on that.
Yes, I'll go ahead and piggyback on that. To echo what's being said, is that your data will never be sold from us, and your sample will never be sold. And once the genetic information has been generated from your sample, like it is at AfricanAncestry.com, your then biological sample will be destroyed. And the whole point of this is to not biobank your specimen, but then utilize the data and leverage the data collectively to identify the drivers of these health disparities that we've known about for so many years now. We've known about them for decades, but yet there has been little done to actually address them. So we're taking the initiative upon ourselves to call upon our community to participate in genetic research and participate in clinical trials so that we can then identify the drivers of these health disparities among our populations and then identify the appropriate treatment targets to then effectively treat them and for the overall purpose of achieving health equity and improving the health and wellness of our populations.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Shout out to Ahmad for her words of encouragement. And so this next segment is going to provide you a bit more information about you becoming research participants, specifically with Indigenous, how you can participate, and how it all works. Next segment, please.
A legacy that has made Howard University a global beacon of hope and promise to a proud people.
As a proud alum of Howard University, I'm delighted to be making this announcement from the yard here on Howard University's campus. Where else would I come to make this kind of historic announcement? I'm Michael Akinwale, former Chief Innovation Officer of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the President of Indigenous Health Group, a newly formed sister company of Indigenous AI.
Will you be faithful to this great legacy?
I will. I will learn from my weaknesses. I will grow beyond strength. I will offer my all, and I will ask God to help me.
At Indigenous Health, we're on a mission to build the most valuable and genetically diverse data bank on the planet. We invite you to support our mission by sharing your sample and signing up at buyusforall.com. Too many Black people are dying too early from chronic sickness and trauma. My father died when he was 67. He didn't live long enough to see any of my children. I want to live longer, healthier. Join our movement at buyusforall.com. Share your sample and support our mission to investigate and create drugs and therapies primarily designed to address conditions affecting communities that have been underserved and overlooked for way too long.
Okay, thank you guys again. We're back. Thank you for watching this live broadcast discussing Henrietta Lacks and the announcement of the partnership between HeLa and Indigenous. You just watched a video concerning how the you becoming a research participant works via the forusbyall.com website. And so we now have Mr. Michael Akinwale, President of Indigenous Health, that you saw in that video to further explain how the program works.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Tia. So it's a pleasure to be here. And ultimately, buyusforall.com is a movement to bring together people of color and veterans from all over the world to participate in research in a meaningful way, to be rewarded from that participation in a meaningful way. And when we think about certain conditions that are specific to communities of color, sickle cell comes to mind. So sickle cell disease affects about 20 million people of color around the world. 300 million people have the trait. It remains the #1 inherited blood disorder in the United States. It affects 1 out of every 500 African Americans, affects 1 out of every 1,500 Hispanic Americans. But it's only funded at a 20th of 1% of NIH's budget, compared to 2 times that much that's used to fund research into dietary supplements, or 4 times as much that's used to fund research into physical activity, or 30 times as much that's used to fund research into aging. And so when we talk about systemic racism in science, you really have to follow the money. And so when you follow the money, it's clear that certain conditions are funded at certain levels, and other conditions are not funded at those levels. And so if you don't fund the research, you're not going to develop the solutions. If you don't develop the solutions, people will continue to suffer. And so we are making a difference with this movement at buyusforall.com. We welcome everyone to check out the microsite and join us as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Akinwale. Dr. Wilson, do you want to add anything concerning the forusbyall.com website? Buyusforall.com website. And then shortly after that, if you can kindly answer this question concerning sickle cell that we've uploaded to the site.
Sure. Just to echo and to piggyback off Michael's comments, it's very important that we participate because populations from the African diaspora are older and more genetically diverse, there are potentially certain genetic drivers that are unique to our population that if we are not present and we are not participating in genetic research to identify those drivers, they will go unfound and unidentified. And then ultimately, we would like to then move forward and develop again effective therapies and targeted therapies, you know, for those drivers that we identify driving disease in our populations. And to specifically, um, well, I was going to speak about the question about sickle cell trait. Um, as an individual who has trait myself, um, yes, education is important, and that's where it has to begin. Um, and one of the basic things that will go a long way to help in that process is just the understanding that if you take a look at the diseases and the conditions that run in your family, for example, and the individuals in your family that are affected by certain diseases and conditions, even though you may not have those conditions, because individuals in your family have them, you're at an increased risk. Now, that doesn't mean that you will definitely get or encounter or develop those diseases, because the genetics are just one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is your environment, and that's your diet, your lifestyle, and the types of things that you do, and also things like your workplace, your work environment. That's a part of the environment as well. So combination of the things that you do that you have control over in terms of diet and lifestyle, and then your work environment coupled with the genetics are what kind of drive these things. So with regards to the genetics part of it, it's so very important that we all participate so that we can identify those drivers that are specific for our population.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And so you guys have so many questions. Thank you for joining us again. And so if you can, please stay. We're going to try to keep this thing going to answer as many questions as we can. Of course, if you have to go, we totally understand it. And again, thank you for joining us. So next question, what do we need to do to collect genetic data for African and other non-Northern European ethnicity people? Currently, 80% of all genetic data used by pharma and other companies is of Europeans. I feel like this is one of our team members that put this question up with these numbers. Again, I'm going to defer to my colleagues, Yusuf and Dr. Wilson, to answer this one as well.
Hey, thanks, Tia. Yeah, that's why we're creating this movement, right? So I think, for those who want to drop off, go to Bios for All and sign up, with your email address and some other additional information. And so, working at the FDA, I started my career pretty young at the agency. And so this is not a, fake number that you saw on the screen. It's actually higher than that. When I started the agency, predominantly 95% of all of the clinical drug trials that I reviewed during my time looking at device and drug approvals at the agency for around 6 to 7 years until I left was primarily of European white male descent. So that means two things. Not only is there lack of diversity as a minority standpoint in the BIPOC community, also women are missing in those trials. And so that's what you see, the initiative here that we've galvanized with the members and team. If you go to Bios for All, you'll see some of our comments on why each team member has signed up and are going to be participating in this trial, because we all have a personal story that resonates on why we were able to form this team. Myself, I have 4 daughters, and so, I want to see research that represent their demographic and race and gender as well going forward when I leave this earth, because again, there are multiple disease areas that individuals struggle with. My twin daughters have a rare genetic eye disease, and so I'm hoping before my lifetime I'm able to contribute with indigenous health and indigenous AI to help change the trajectory of them going blind, essentially. And so, this is an important mission for us, important mission for having more women included in the trials of all racial and ethnic background. And it's also important for us to have minority and BIPOC people in these trials because, again, it's the only way forward in truly making medicine better and actually carrying out the mission of having precision medicine and better health care for all so we can eradicate some of the health disparities.
Dr. Wilson, did you have any commentary on this matter?
Sure, absolutely. With regards to the trials, yes, Yusuf is correct, and it is that for that very reason. With regards to adverse events that you may see from a medication that's being under trial, or for the potential benefits, either on both sides of the equation. That's where the diversity is important. And with regards to the inclusion, again, with our populations being more diverse, it's then that much more important that we are represented there.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And so just for those of us that are not aware of what adverse events are, these are events that happen when someone or a patient takes a medication and things happen out of the ordinary. It's not expected. And sometimes that happens, especially with people in the BIPOC community, because as Yusuf and Dr. Wilson have stated over and over again throughout this event, we're not included in those clinical trials. We weren't included when they mapped out the original human genome. So things happen to us a lot more when we take some of these medications or on some of these treatments. Next question. Have you considered sharing the genomic information with the participants, or perhaps even offering genetic counseling services if wanted to the participants to have more insight to their health? Again, I'll let Yusuf and them take that, but I can say that at this time, most of us with our physicians, sometimes these tests are ran. One of the popular ones is often they test on people of color is whether or not you're pre-diabetic. So when they take that blood sample, 9 times out of 10, they're doing some type of genetic analysis and are able to see that you may be more closer to being able to have diabetes versus others if one or more of your parents are already diabetic or has that allele, meaning that genetic code to be a diabetic. But again, I'll divert to Yusuf and our doctor here, Dr. Wilson, to answer that question.
That's part of the movement that we're creating. Once we're able, you're signed up, and we're able to collect some additional information like family history. We'll be able to start, creating specific matchup with some of the areas that you could be predisposed to. One of the areas that we're very much lacking in this field, as Dr. Wilson mentioned, this is quite a fairly new area and field of genetics and genomics. And so, we're going to now start to, correlate genetic information, also information around some of these disease areas specific to minority communities. We've pledged to start having, kind of a library to, address some of these health disparity and disease areas that are highly predominantly in the African American and BIPOC community. And one of those areas is genetic counseling. We understand that there's very few certified genetic counselors and even fewer genetic counselors of color. And so, that's going to be part of an effort that Dr. Brad Wilson will be spearheading in starting to coalesce expertise within the genetics field, the geneticist field, to still bringing that library of information so that we can answer some of these questions as we start to identify where these individuals are predisposed based on their family history once we gather additional information through our survey on our biosforall.com website. I'll let Dr. Wilson get a little bit more into the details since he's the trained geneticist on the panel.
Sure, thanks, Yusuf. Absolutely, genetic counseling is definitely a component of what we're doing in our mission. As we are able to conduct these genetic studies and then identify these drivers of disease in terms of reporting back to individuals who are participants in terms of what it means in terms of their risk after we have them being able to do these studies and conduct this research. Genetic counselors are a critical component or a critical player in that process of relaying that information about risk back to individuals in terms of their, when they participate in these studies. And what will be unique about what we're doing is that we'll be able to, part of what we're asking you to share is some information from your medical records, right? In terms of being able to specifically associate specific genetic variants with those particular clinical values that are key to a given disease. So it'll be your blood pressure for hypertension, and then your blood sugar level for diabetes, and then your cholesterol level for cardiovascular disease and heart disease, things of that nature. So with the ability to directly analyze your genetic data and match it with corresponding clinical data is what will give us the power to detect the genes and the genetic variants that are really driving these diseases in our communities. And that's what will give our studies the power to identify these things, as long as we get people to participate. And that's where the folks in the audience come in.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. All right, guys, so we're going to take one more quick question before we close out the show. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. So how are you standing up for Henrietta Lacks? Yeah, great question. So HeLa is the first commercial life science space, co-working space for life science startups, meaning they come into this space, we mentor them, we give them access to funding, and they actually build out a prototype they could clinically develop and take it to market. So what that means is to actually create an actual drug at the HeLa space, or a medical device, or an artificial tissue to help people, such as folks like us and everybody else in the community that may need it. So HeLa, if you hear it in the name, is actually named after Henrietta Lacks. The name HeLa and HeLa Cells are actually taken from her initials. And so for us, one thing we're doing is not allowing anyone in HeLa to use her cells for their research and discovery operations. The other portion of it is that we are in discussions with Henrietta Lacks' legal team for us to be able to help. We can't provide any extensive detail on that, but we are actively working in discussion with her legal team concerning this matter. And then on top of that, as far as HeLa, the other way we'll participate is being able to donate a percentage of our revenue to the Henrietta Lacks Foundation. And that foundation is directly managed on behalf of that family. If you do your research, you'll see that the funding is used for multiple things, including healthcare, education, all those different items to support the Henrietta Lacks family. So that's where we're starting. Any more questions before we wrap up? All right, so thank you guys for joining us. Please stay tuned. Please go check out the website for us by all.com to register. Buy Us For All. Sorry, I keep messing it up. So Buy Us For All. I'm thinking of FUBU. That's why I keep saying it the other way. But go check out the website and sign up to be a research participant. Us that you heard from on this panel, each one of us have already committed to being research participants in this effort. And then please stay tuned to our social media channels. This was just a preview of what we discussed a few weeks ago, and so we'll be showing the recording in its entirety through our social media channels in the upcoming weeks. So thank you again. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support. Thank you.